We have a very strange vehicle for today's video, and it's because of that this is being featured, and it is one that it was completely unexpected. And I thought that this tank was going to be kind of mediocre, kind of a little bit bad, but it ended up being one of the favourite vehicles that I've played in recent times, and it is of course a fairly well balanced vehicle in the Vindicator Charioteer. So this is the tier 8 premium version of the Charioteer, which it makes it one of the tanks that you probably think is just purely better than the Charioteer. But of course the difference between this and your actual Charioteer is that it doesn't get the high alpha damage Hesh gun. It in fact has a much smaller main armament, which means that you have incredible damage per minute. I mean, the reload speed of this vehicle right here, like you're seeing, is 3.8 seconds, and you can deal 280 damage, I believe, in one singular shell, which means that you're able to devastate opponents, and it's super easy to do. Like, it is very fun, and it also has insane like concealment and also view range, allowing you to basically remain undetected and play this really stealthy build that basically just doesn't get spotted, unless of course you misplay, or maybe the opponents just become overwhelming and there's nothing you can really do but just stay there and take the hits. But of course doesn't get the most hit points for a tier 8 vehicle, only 1150, so you know, kind of sucks on that front. But remember, it does get that alpha damage to dish out damage to your opponents that is going to more than make up for the fact that you have the low alpha. Now, already within this replay, you've seen both the accuracy and the ability to fire rounds consistently. So it's really nice to have that, and we've been able to pick up 1000 damage. And this tank can really have those games where you feel like you are just dominating opponents because of the fact that you have the good alpha, but also because of the fact that you're mobile and you're agile enough to be really flexible within the game, and you can find opponents like the Jagdpanzer IV here and just get into a nice position using the gun depression. Of course it gets a decent chunk of gun depression, and it also gets the mobility, like we've talked about, to get into a position pretty quickly to deal damage. And you can see here, up against tier 6s, obviously not the fairest reflection of how the tank performs, but we do have another replay in a minute as well that we can showcase. But this one primarily focuses on that even in a bad matchup, or at least a bad game, you can still have fantastic results. And you can see here, we're trying to blind fire the opponents. You've got loads of rounds in this thing, which means that you can go for blind fires, and if you do manage to find an opponent, you have such a nice intra-clip reload, not that it has a clip, but an intra reload or reload that allows you to both go for the tracking shots and then continuously fire. And it means that not only do you get actual damage, but you can go for tracking damage. You can lock an opponent in a really awkward position where they're not able to hit you or something like that. For example, if they come over a hill, you can track them and then you can retrack them, and it just becomes so much fun to just make your opponents feel like they're a bit terrible. And yeah, this tank definitely does that. Now, we've realised that the enemies have won the town and they're going to be pushing towards this area, so it's time to go back, time to do something, or potentially make my way into try and help the team. Now, I was trying to actually say cover the base, but for some reason the button just was not working. It wouldn't let me actually pick anything. Don't know what was going on, but you know, typical wargaming. I believe this was not long after the most recent patch to the game, or the season. But either way, we do have to get into position. You can see here now there's a Chrysler, and the Chrysler is not the easiest tank to pen, which is why you should probably just load the premium rounds. And we've got quite a few in this tank, but in this sort of matchup you don't really need it. The pen is more than enough to go through most vehicles. Maybe not the Chrysler frontally. Of course the premium rounds enable you to just go through the Chrysler frontally, so that's always nice. But at this point we are kind of damage limitation. It's not looking good. It's 5 to 10. We're 5 tanks down. The enemy team have got pretty much the entire position over here. We've got an IS-2 that's pushing up, and of course an enemy tank destroyer in the M56 Scorpion, which if we had HE rounds would be a easy, nice target to go for. Unfortunately not the case at this moment in time, but maybe we'll be able to farm them nonetheless. Now the IS-2 here, obviously coming out, we've got the premium rounds loaded. It's time for the carrying scenario. We want to get as much damage as possible, and unfortunately for him we lock him in place and we've got him trapped, and there's no way of these tanks actually spotting us for some reason. And there you go, the IS-2 is out of the game, and unfortunately for the M56 Scorpion, he too is not in the best of positions, and we're able to deal a bit of damage to him. But we do have a lot of tanks coming from behind. We're now down by 6 vehicles. We've done 3,200 damage with 1,000 assists as well, and yeah, it's just becoming more and more apparent that we're going to lose this game, and hopefully we'll be able to at least try and do something to get some extra damage as well. Now the Falcon T92, not the nicest of vehicles. We're trying to go for that 3 shots of damage on him. You can see not able to get the second shot off quite, but the fact that we were even potentially able to get a shot off onto him is kind of nice. But here you go, the turret traverse of the Vindicator is slightly better than the standard Charioteer, which allows you to actually be able to try and stop opponents from just YOLO wagoning you, and therefore you're able to get a bit of damage when maybe you wouldn't expect to. Now, not particularly great when you see a Type 59 coming towards you, since it's a bit of a pain in the backside, but I decide, you know what, I want to get this, get the Falcon T92, but unfortunately we don't manage to take him out, and we do end up losing. But I mean, 4,300 damage in a game like that, where you're kind of forced at the end to at least try and buff up the damage numbers that you've done, enabling you to get the highest damage in the game, is obviously a nice little result. And I was very, very surprised at how much damage this thing could put out. But that's not it, because I want to see what else this tank can do, because, you know, you can have one game. This was my first game in it, and, you know, it might not always be true to reflection. So the very next game we jump in, and of course we get a tier 10 game, because why wouldn't you want to play tier 10 in your Charioteer, essentially? Well, why wouldn't you? Because there's Tyrans in the game that have a 950 alpha, of course, and of course not particularly the nicest tanks to play up against when you're in a paper tank. Essentially this has the Comet hull with a Charioteer turret, and yeah, has this low alpha damage, and at this sort of tier you definitely need some premium rounds, and you definitely need to remain undetected, which is actually fine because this tank has both of those. So in a top tier or a bottom tier matchup where you're up against top tier tanks like the E100, some of the heavily armoured vehicles, the premium rounds can definitely come in useful, and they still enable you to pen pretty much everything frontally if at least you go for the weak points, and even sometimes you don't even need to go for the weak points with this vehicle, and essentially you can even go for tracking shells with this to enable yourself to get some assistance damage. It may even be worth firing more HE. In hindsight, I probably would have taken some HE in this thing for light tanks, tank destroyers, to buff up that damage per minute, and also go for tracking shells on higher tier heavies that I might get some assistance damage and track assist because of it. But at this point I'm thinking, oh, I might go down with the boys over here, but it's kind of a risky play, and I decide I'm not going to go there since I could probably just farm from the hilltop. A lot of heavies and tank destroyers, or tank destroyers mainly, will sit up in here as the heavies push on the one line, and so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to park up. I'm not in a top tier tank. If I was in a top tier one, I would probably push up to where the medium is, or at least the heavy tank, and try and fight over the ridge maybe. But in this sort of matchup, it's just not worth it. And so we sit back tight, use the camo of this tank, which is unbelievable, and we'll get into that in a second, because that makes this tank one of the nicest tanks to play because of the fact that you get that camo. And if you use the camo right in World of Tanks, which most people, to be honest with you, don't, then you can come out with some incredible results. And that is the difference between using a tank that you might think, oh, this is pretty bad. Of course the Charity is bad if you try and brawl with it, and if you go into positions where of course you're going to get spotted and therefore you don't have any armor, you don't have the alpha damage, you're not going to come out nicely. But if you can hold yourself in a position where, you know, you can use a bush or you can use some form of camo to outspot your opponents and therefore just out damage them as well, then yeah, it's always going to be nice. Now we get a free shot into the AVRE, which is always a good result. Love getting some free damage on those horrible tier 10 derped cannons. That is of course the premium or ultimate season pass tank that you can pick up in the game, and I'm sure some of you have probably seen the video on the vehicle itself. And of course you can leave your own opinions in the comment section down below what you think of that. But if you've made it this far in this video, if you want to support me and you actually enjoy watching the video, then please do like it. I don't often ask for it, but it does really help out the video. Of course, try and reach more people, as I'm sure you're well aware if you watch anyone else on YouTube. I'm not going to try and BS you into something, but anyway, moving on with the gameplay, we have got a few options here. Since we haven't done that much damage, I've got to start doing something, otherwise I'm going to end up with a team that has been steamrolled, and I too would have been steamrolled without actually having an input. So I decide, you know what, maybe I'm going to go towards the cap circle. There's a lot of tanks over there, and from this point it's time to actually start making an impact. And from this point, it is time to start making an impact, because if we don't, we're going to find ourselves in a bit of a predicament. So, with 233 damage under my belt, yes, games like this do happen for myself, although you may not see them that much on the channel. That is mainly because, you know, you only usually see the best games on the YouTube channel. But either way, we're going after this Scorpion here. I try and get a free shot into him. We have got the premium loaded now, since it is, I don't want to bounce any rounds from here on out, because we may not get that many opportunities to get that much damage. And so I decide it's time to try and go for this Grilla. We pull back behind a ton of bushes, and now it's just time to farm him up as he pushes towards the last remaining vehicles on our team. Just slowly making my way further and further back. That was a terribly aimed shot. I did not lead it whatsoever. And then we end up actually, well, someone tracks him, and then we retrack him, and then we just go for the tracking shell so that he's always tracked. Unfortunately, he repairs it, but it doesn't make a single bit of difference since we find him again and our teammate tracks him again as well. So not particularly the greatest point, but from here you can actually spot opponents in the cap, and that is exactly what we're aiming to do. You're seeing me trying to go for the tracking shot on the E75. We do reset him, but uh-oh, this is not good, and especially when there's an FV4005. Now I know that there's a Quillin behind me, which is not ideal, but we do have some team support. I mean, we've got a broken Tyran, so at least hopefully he'll be able to do something against him. And at this point I'm just thinking, you know what, it's time to go. If we don't go, it's just going to end up with it being terrible. I'm trying to pen the Quillin, which doesn't have the most armor in the game anyway, and you can see me here feeling a little bit worse for where the Quillin actually looking in the wrong direction at the Tyran, and we do manage to end up picking him up. But there is still a vehicle in the cap, and it is a Löwe. We managed to hit him, but unfortunately he wasn't the one in the cap after hindsight. So we see him there, we get a free shell of damage, but now we have the E75 to go back and defend against. But hopefully we'll be able to go undetected. Probably not, now that we fired at him. And either way, we've picked up 3,200 damage. The Löwe fires, so I decide it's time to go, and we do need to reset the cap for definite now. And with all of the tanks left alive, we're not going to win, but I just want to prolong the engagement as much as possible so we can get some damage and hopefully come away with a victory. Well, a victory in terms of damage numbers, not an actual victory. There's no way you can really carry that hard in a tier 10 game against vehicles like this. Now the E75 is looking the wrong way, and we managed to hit him quite nicely there. Unfortunately not able to get the back of the armor of the E75, which kind of sucks, but either way maybe we'll be able to find him. not quite. And there we go, 3,400 damage so far, and only 844 hit points to trade with at this point in time, especially when coming up against things like the FV4005 and the tank destroyers. It is probably not going to go too well, and of course we bounce off of one of the vehicles that we 100% shouldn't bounce off, and then we get finished off by a Waffle Panzer IV who was camping up in F6 or F5 or somewhere like that. But we end up losing, no surprise. Defender medal though, 3,645 damage, meaning that we were the second highest damage within the game in the tier 8 tank destroyer that is not particularly that overpowered, but it is definitely very, very good in the hands of someone that knows how to use camo, and hopefully you did enjoy this, and hopefully you'll join me back in a video on screen right here. And yeah, thank you very much. Once again, like the video if you did, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.